Boy clinically dead returns with a message from God, what he says brings everyone to tears. The emergency room doors burst open as nurses rushed a small, lifeless body through the sterile corridors of St. Michael's Hospital. 10-year-old Tommy Parker's skin had turned an ashen gray, his chest still, while Dr. Richard Matthews barked urgent orders over the controlled chaos. Sarah Parker, her waitress uniform still on from her morning shift, ran alongside the gurney, her trembling hands clutching her son's cold fingers. "No pulse for 15 minutes," a paramedic reported grimly. "We've been doing CPR since the school." The rhythmic beeping of monitors filled the trauma bay, each flat line on the screen marking another second without life. Dr. Matthews worked frantically, his experienced hands moving with precision while murmuring numbers and medical terms to his team. After what seemed like an eternity, he stepped back, glancing at the clock on the wall. Time of death, 10:47 a.m., he announced solemnly, his voice barely masking his own emotion at losing such a young patient. Sarah's anguished scream pierced the hospital's somber atmosphere as she collapsed to her knees, her prayers echoing through the halls. What no one knew in that moment of despair was that Tommy Parker's story wasn't ending, it was about to change everything they believed about life, death, and the power of divine love. Before diving into this touching story, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments below and hit the like button if stories of faith move your heart. In the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, the Parkers lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above Jerry's hardware store on Main Street. Sarah Parker had been raising Tommy alone since her husband David died in a construction accident 5 years ago, leaving her with crushing medical bills and a 5-year-old son to support. Despite working double shifts as a waitress at the local diner and cleaning offices on weekends, Sarah somehow maintained an unwavering spirit of grace and resilience that she passed on to her son. Tommy Parker was different from other 10-year-olds in ways that made adults pause and children wonder. Despite wearing second-hand clothes and carrying a worn backpack held together with safety pins, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed beyond his years. His bright blue eyes, inherited from his father, held a depth of understanding that often made people forget they were talking to a child. Even with their struggles, Tommy never complained about having less than his classmates. Every morning he would wake up early to help his mother prepare breakfast, usually just toast and eggs, but he made it special by arranging the food into smiley faces that never failed to make his exhausted mother laugh. Before leaving for school, he would carefully pack an extra sandwich, not for himself, but for old Joe, the homeless veteran who sat outside the public library. The sandwich was always accompanied by a handwritten note with words of encouragement that Tommy had heard his mother say during their toughest times. The Parkers' apartment might have been small, but it was filled with love and carefully preserved memories. Photos of David Parker lined the walls, him holding newborn Tommy, teaching him to walk, their last Christmas together. These weren't just decorations, they were Tommy's daily reminders of the father he was determined to make proud. Each night he would talk to his dad's picture, sharing the day's events and promising to take care of Mom, just as he had promised his father in the hospital 5 years ago. Sarah often found herself watching Tommy when he wasn't looking, marveling at how her son could maintain such joy despite their circumstances. He had inherited her resilience but possessed something uniquely his own, an ability to find light in the darkest corners of life. When the electricity was cut off for 3 days last winter, Tommy turned it into an adventure, creating shadow puppets by candlelight and declaring it their special camping trip. When they couldn't afford new shoes for school, he colored his old ones with markers, telling everyone they were custom designed. The most remarkable thing about Tommy, however, was his capacity for empathy. Despite their own hardships, he was always thinking of others. He spent his free time helping elderly Mrs. Wilson with her groceries, teaching younger children at Sunday school, and visiting the nursing home where his mother occasionally picked up extra shifts. The residents there adored him, not just for his youthful energy, but for his genuine interest in their stories and his ability to make each person feel truly seen and valued. Their financial situation meant Tommy couldn't join after-school activities or go on field trips, but he never let that diminish his enthusiasm for learning or helping others. Instead, he created his own ways to participate in community life. He started a Reading Buddies program during lunch breaks, helping struggling classmates with their reading while eating his modest packed lunch. When the school had fundraisers he couldn't contribute to, he would offer his time instead, staying after school to help teachers organize their classrooms or clean up the playground. This was Tommy Parker, a boy who had every reason to be bitter but chose joy, who had little to give but gave everything, who carried adult-sized burdens with a child's pure heart. No one could have known that his greatest test and his most profound impact on the community was about to begin on what seemed like just another ordinary school day in Millbrook. At St. Catherine's Catholic School, Tommy's presence was both a blessing and a source of controversy. Father James Miller, a silver-haired priest with kind eyes and weathered hands, had fought the school board to accept Tommy on a special scholarship, arguing that the church's mission was to serve those most in need. The aging priest saw something special in the boy, a pure faith that reminded him of his own calling to priesthood 50 years ago. The hallways of St. Catherine's were a stark contrast to Tommy's humble home life. Most students arrived in luxury CFEs, wearing designer uniforms and carrying the latest electronics. Blake Thompson, the school board president's son, led a group of privileged students who made it their mission to remind Tommy of his place in their social hierarchy. They mocked his scuffed shoes, his outdated phone, and the fact that his mother served their parents at the local diner. However, Father James remained Tommy's steadfast defender. The priest had converted his office into a quiet study space where Tommy could complete his homework while waiting for his mother's shift to end. During these afternoon sessions, they would discuss matters of faith, with Tommy asking questions that often left the experienced priest in thoughtful silence. Why does God let some people have so much while others have so little? Tommy once asked, not with bitterness but genuine curiosity. Despite the daily challenges, Tommy's presence began to change St. Catherine's in subtle ways. When Lisa Williams, a popular 8th grader, forgot her lunch money, Tommy shared his modest sandwich without hesitation. This simple act of kindness from the boy they had stigmatized sparked conversations among the students about privilege and compassion. Even some of his former tormentors found themselves reconsidering their attitudes after Tommy volunteered to tutor them in subjects they struggled with. The school's annual charity drive revealed the depth of Tommy's impact. While other students brought in checks from their parents, Tommy organized a kindness campaign encouraging students to perform acts of service in the community. He maintained a bulletin board tracking these good deeds, celebrating every contribution regardless of size. Under his influence, students who had never spoken to their household staff began learning their names and stories. Yet not everyone appreciated these changes. Several influential parents complained about their children being exposed to poverty. They questioned Father James's judgment in admitting a scholarship student who couldn't contribute financially to the school's development. Board member Richard Thompson, Blake's father and CEO of the local hospital network, was particularly vocal about maintaining the school's standards. Through it all, Tommy maintained his quiet dignity and unwavering kindness. When he discovered Blake Thompson struggling with math behind the gymnasium, crying over the pressure to maintain perfect grades, Tommy didn't hesitate to help. He spent his lunch breaks tutoring his bully, never mentioning it to anyone. Blake's grades improved, but his father attributed it to the expensive private tutor he'd hired. Father James watched all this with growing concern and pride. He saw how Tommy's presence was forcing the community to confront its own values, challenging the comfortable separation between charity as an abstract concept and genuine Christian love in action. The priest recognized that Tommy wasn't just a student in need of help, he was unknowingly teaching lessons that no religious curriculum could convey. As winter approached and temperatures dropped, Tommy initiated a coat drive for the homeless shelter. The simple action sparked heated debates in parent-teacher meetings about the school's image and priorities. Yet when local media covered the story, applications to St. Catherine's increased, with families citing the school's commitment to Christian values as their reason for interest. The morning it happened began like any other at St. Catherine's. Tommy sat in his usual spot by the window during Sister Margaret's math class, the autumn sunlight casting a warm glow across his worn textbook. He had stayed up late helping his mother count tips from her extra shift, but his attention remained focused on the algebra equations on the board. The clock read 10:15 a.m. when the first signs appeared. Initially, Tommy felt a strange lightness in his chest, like butterflies, but somehow different. He raised his hand to ask permission to get some water, but the words wouldn't come. Sister Margaret turned from the blackboard just in time to see his blue eyes widen with confusion. The piece of chalk she held fell to the floor with a soft click that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent classroom. Tommy, her voice carried a note of concern that made the other students look up from their notebooks. They watched as their classmate's face turned an unsettling shade of gray, his usually bright eyes becoming distant and unfocused. Blake Thompson, sitting 2 rows behind, found himself standing involuntarily, all thoughts of their past conflicts forgotten in the face of something terrifyingly real. Tommy tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The room began to spin, the faces of his classmates blurring into a whirl of colors. The last thing he heard was Lisa Williams scream as he collapsed, his head making a dull thud against the wooden floor. Sister Margaret's rosary beads clicked against her cross as she rushed to his side, her years of first aid training kicking in automatically. "Call 911, she commanded, her usually gentle voice sharp with urgency, "and get Father James." 2 students bolted from the room, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. The remaining children huddled together, watching in horror as their teacher began chest compressions on their motionless classmate. Father James arrived moments before the paramedics, his weathered face pale with concern. He knelt beside Tommy, whispering prayers while Sister Margaret continued CPR. The priest had seen death before, had administered last rites countless times, but something about seeing this particular child so still made his hands tremble as he made the sign of the cross. The paramedics burst through the classroom door with their equipment, their practiced movements and professional demeanor a stark contrast to the emotional chaos around them. As they worked, Father James herded the shocked students into the hallway, where they formed a spontaneous prayer circle. Even Blake Thompson, who had never shown much interest in religious matters, found himself mumbling "Our Fathers" between barely suppressed sobs. Sarah Parker arrived just as they were loading Tommy into the ambulance, her diner apron still tied around her waist, her face a mask of terror no parent should have to wear. Father James held her as she watched the paramedics continue their desperate efforts to restart her son's heart. The ambulance siren cut through the crisp autumn air, its wail carrying a mother's prayers and a community's collective breath. In the classroom, abandoned in the rush, Tommy's notebook lay open on his desk. The last thing he had written was the answer to a math problem, the numbers neat and precise, followed by a small doodle of a sun. Next to it he had written what would later seem prophetic: "Every number tells a story." Every story matters. Sister Margaret would later find it while collecting his things, and the simple wisdom of those words would bring her to tears. The emergency room at St. Michael's Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as medical staff worked frantically over Tommy's lifeless body. Dr. Matthews, a veteran of 20 years in emergency medicine, had seen countless critical cases, but something about this one felt different. The boy's face, peaceful despite their desperate efforts, seemed to hold a light that even death couldn't fully extinguish. Sarah Parker knelt in the corner of the trauma room, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Father James stood beside her, his deep voice steady as he led her in prayer. The medical team had allowed them to stay, perhaps recognizing that this moment required more than just science. The rhythmic sound of the heart monitor's flat line provided a grim soundtrack to their desperate supplications. "Time of death, 10:47 a.m., Dr. Matthews announced, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. The words fell like stones in the suddenly quiet room. Sarah's anguished cry echoed through the sterile halls, a sound of such raw pain that nurses several floors away would later say it haunted their dreams. In that moment of deepest despair, something extraordinary happened. The fluorescent lights in the trauma room flickered, and for a brief second witnesses would later swear they saw a soft golden glow surround Tommy's body. The heart monitor, which had been silent, suddenly emitted a single strong beep. Then another. And another. Dr. Matthews rushed back to the bedside, his experienced hands moving with renewed urgency. "This is impossible," he muttered, watching as color returned to Tommy's cheeks. The boy's chest began to rise and fall with steady breaths, defying every medical expectation. Sarah's sobs of grief transformed into cries of joy as she witnessed her son's miraculous return. Tommy's eyes fluttered open, but they were different, somehow deeper, as if they had seen things beyond mortal understanding. The first words he spoke, barely a whisper, would be debated and discussed for years to come to light. "It's so beautiful. He wants me to tell you something." The room fell silent. Even the medical equipment seemed to quiet down. Father James leaned forward, his weathered face a mixture of wonder and reverence. Tommy's voice grew stronger as he continued. God says we've forgotten the most important thing. It's not about buildings or money or power. It's about love. Just love. Nurses who had been hardened by years of tragedy found themselves wiping away tears. Dr. Matthews, a self-proclaimed skeptic, felt something shift in his understanding of life and death. The room seemed to fill with an inexplicable warmth, a presence that even the most scientifically minded couldn't deny. Sarah gathered her son in her arms, feeling his heart beat strongly against her chest, a rhythm that medical science said should have been impossible after such a long period without oxygen. Father James watched the reunion with grateful tears, making the sign of the cross as he whispered a prayer of thanksgiving. Outside the trauma room, word of Tommy's resurrection spread through the hospital like wildfire. Staff members who had witnessed the event spoke in hushed, reverent tones. By nightfall, local news vans would gather outside the hospital, their reporters eager to share what was already being called the miracle at St. Michael's. What no one realized in those first joyous moments was that Tommy's return would set in motion a chain of events that would test faith, reveal hidden truths, and ultimately transform an entire community. The real miracle was only beginning. As our story takes this miraculous turn, if you're feeling moved by Tommy's journey between life and death, take a moment to show your support with a gentle tap of the like button. Your engagement helps this message of faith and love reach more hearts. 3 days after his miraculous revival, Tommy sat in his hospital room, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle afternoon light filtering through Venetian blinds. Dr. Matthews had insisted on keeping him for observation, though all tests showed him to be in perfect health, better even than before his collapse. The small room had become an unexpected sanctuary, offering Tommy time to process the profound experience that had changed him forever. When he finally began sharing his story, his voice carried a quiet authority that made even the most skeptical listeners pause. His mother and Father James sat beside his bed, recording every word, as Tommy described his journey to what he called the other side. His account was remarkably detailed and consistent each time he told it, with none of the haziness or confusion often associated with near-death experiences. First, there was this moment of complete peace, Tommy explained, his blue eyes distant with remembrance. All the noise and fear just disappeared. Then I saw this light, but it wasn't like any light we have here. It was alive somehow, warm and welcoming, like being wrapped in pure love. He described floating through what seemed like a tunnel of golden light, where time stopped having any meaning. But it was his description of the beings he encountered that left his listeners breathless. They were there, waiting for me, he said softly. Dad was there. Sarah's hand tightened on the bedsheet at these words. He looked just like in our photos, but happier, younger somehow. He hugged me and said he was proud of me for taking care of you, Mom. Tommy went on to describe others he met: his grandmother, who had died before he was born, whose appearance matched exactly with photos he'd never seen, and others he didn't recognize but who seemed familiar somehow. They all had this light inside them, he explained. And they showed me things like watching movies, but you're inside them. I saw how every kind thing we do creates ripples of light that touch other people, even when we can't see it. The most profound part of his experience, however, was his encounter with what he described as the source of all light. Tommy struggled to find words adequate to describe it. It wasn't scary, he insisted. It was like everything good and pure and loving you've ever felt, all at once, but a million times stronger. And there was this voice, not really a voice like we have, but I understood everything perfectly. The message he received was both simple and profound. God showed me that we're all connected by love. It's like this golden thread that runs through everything. But we've forgotten how to see it. We get so busy with other things that we miss what's most important. Tommy's voice grew stronger as he continued. He said, I needed to come back to remind people, not just about heaven being real, but about how we're supposed to live here now. Love isn't just a feeling, it's what we're made of. As he spoke, the medical staff who had gathered to listen found themselves deeply moved. A young nurse quietly wiped away tears. Dr. Matthews, standing in the doorway, found his scientific skepticism challenged by the profound wisdom coming from this 10-year-old boy. Even the hardened hospital chaplain, who had heard countless stories of near-death experiences, recognized something uniquely authentic in Tommy's account. The hardest part, Tommy admitted, his voice catching slightly, was coming back. They showed me some of what would happen, that it wouldn't be easy. But they said sometimes the greatest love is shown by being willing to return and face difficulties for the sake of others. He looked at his mother with eyes that seemed centuries old. I chose to come back, Mom. There's something important I have to do here. Father James, who had been taking careful notes, was struck by the theological sophistication of Tommy's experience. The boy's descriptions aligned with Scripture in ways that someone his age couldn't have fabricated, yet they also contained new insights that the priest found both challenging and illuminating. This was not the simple story of a child's brush with death, it was something far more profound. News of Tommy's experience spread rapidly through Millbrook, transforming the quiet hospital into an unexpected pilgrimage site. Local media descended first, with Channel 5's veteran reporter Rachel Andrews conducting a respectful interview that would soon go viral. Her piece, titled "A Child's Journey to Heaven," captured the public's imagination and triggered a national conversation about faith, near-death experiences, and the existence of an afterlife. The hospital lobby, filled with people hoping to catch a glimpse of the miracle boy, letters and cards poured in from around the country, many sharing similar experiences that people had kept secret for years, fearing ridicule. Dr. Matthews found himself fielding calls from medical researchers and religious scholars alike, all eager to study this extraordinary case that defied scientific explanation. At St. Catherine's, Tommy's classmates struggled to reconcile the friend they knew with the figure now making national headlines. Blake Thompson, particularly affected by witnessing Tommy's collapse, became unusually quiet and contemplative. During morning assembly, he surprised everyone by standing up and publicly apologizing for his past behavior, describing how watching Tommy die and return had changed his perspective on what truly mattered in life. The response from religious authorities was mixed. While Father James advocated for a careful and open-minded examination of Tommy's experience, others were more skeptical. Bishop Harrison, known for his conservative views, expressed concern about the sensationalization of what may be merely a medical anomaly. Some religious leaders worried that Tommy's message about universal love and connection challenged traditional doctrine. Meanwhile, the medical community grappled with their own questions. Tommy's medical records showed 15 minutes without a heartbeat, well beyond the point where brain damage should have been irreversible. Yet not only had he survived, but he showed enhanced cognitive abilities and a depth of understanding that puzzled neurologists. Dr. Matthews found himself increasingly challenged by cases that defied his materialistic worldview. The media attention brought unexpected complications. Richard Thompson, recognizing a potential opportunity, approached Sarah with an offer from his hospital network. They wanted to make Tommy the face of their new pediatric wing, promising comprehensive healthcare coverage for both him and his mother in exchange. The offer was tempting, especially given their financial struggles, but something about the corporate marketing team's planned narrative felt wrong to Sarah. Father James observed all this with growing concern. He recognized in Tommy's story elements that echoed ancient mystical accounts, yet he worried about the pressure being placed on such young shoulders. The priest spent hours in prayer, seeking guidance on how to protect both the messenger and the message. His own position at St. Catherine's became increasingly precarious as wealthy parents complained about the disruption to normal school life. As Tommy prepared to leave the hospital, an unexpected visitor arrived. Lisa Williams' grandmother, who had been in a coma for 3 years. She had awakened the day after Tommy's experience, claiming to have met him in the light during her own journey between worlds. Her detailed description of their encounter matched Tommy's account perfectly, though they had never met in physical life. This independent correlation caught the attention of Dr. Elizabeth Foster, a renowned researcher in consciousness studies, who began documenting similar cases connected to Tommy's experience. The local community found itself divided. While many embraced Tommy's message of love and interconnection, others felt threatened by its implications. The boy, who had once been invisible to many of his wealthy classmates, now found himself at the center of a growing controversy about faith, truth, and the nature of reality itself. Some called him a mystic, others a prophet, and skeptics suggested it was all an elaborate hoax. Through it all, Tommy maintained the same gentle demeanor that had characterized him before his experience. When asked about his critics, he showed no anger or defensiveness, responding only with compassion and understanding. They're part of the same light, he would say, even if they can't see it, yet his simple wisdom in the face of growing controversy only served to deepen the mystery surrounding his experience. The real challenges began 6 weeks after Tommy's return, when Medicorp, a national healthcare conglomerate, entered the picture. Richard Thompson had quietly arranged a meeting between corporate executives and the school board, presenting what he called an opportunity to benefit everyone. The proposal was ambitious, a multi-million-dollar partnership between St. Catherine's, Medicorp, and their New Miracles in Medicine campaign, with Tommy as the centerpiece. In a sleek boardroom high above Millbrooks Main Street, Medicorp's marketing team unveiled their vision. They wanted to transform Tommy's experience into a branded message of hope, complete with a book deal, speaking tours, and a documentary series. The financial package was staggering enough to renovate St. Catherine's aging building, establish a scholarship fund, and ensure the Parker family's financial security for life. All Tommy needed to do was stick to their carefully crafted script about his experience. Bishop Harrison, seeing an opportunity to expand the church's influence, threw his support behind the proposal. This could bring so many souls back to the faith. He argued during a private meeting with Father James, who sat in uncomfortable silence as marketing executives discussed monetizing what he considered a sacred experience. The bishop's enthusiasm grew as Medicorp's representatives outlined plans for a nationwide tour of Catholic hospitals and schools. The pressure on Sarah Parker mounted daily. Medicorp's lawyers presented contracts thick with legal jargon, while their financial advisors painted pictures of Tommy's secure future. Think about his education, they urged, his opportunities. The weight of years of financial struggle made their offers almost irresistible. Yet something about their polished presentations felt at odds with the pure simplicity of Tommy's message. Tommy himself began noticing subtle changes in how his story was being shaped. During a preliminary interview for the documentary, he spoke about seeing souls of different faiths united in the light. The producer quickly interrupted, suggesting they focus on more traditional Catholic elements. When Tommy mentioned the importance of helping the poor and challenging social inequality, messages he said were emphasized during his divine encounter, the cameras stopped rolling. The situation at St. Catherine's grew increasingly tense. Richard Thompson, now appointed as the liaison between Medicorp and the school, began implementing changes before any contracts were signed. The Modest Kindness campaign. Bulletin board was replaced with a professional display featuring Medicorp's branding. Tommy's simple accounts of his experience were edited into polished testimonials that somehow lost their original meaning. Father James watched with growing alarm as corporate influence seeped into every aspect of the story. During Sunday Mass, he delivered a sermon about Jesus driving merchants from the temple, his eyes meeting Tommy's in a moment of shared understanding. The next day, he received notice of a temporary assignment to a remote parish in northern Maine, effective immediately. The local media, initially sympathetic to Tommy's story, began publishing articles questioning the authenticity of his experience. Anonymous sources suggested the whole incident had been orchestrated to attract corporate investment. Social media buzzed with conspiracy theories, some linking the Parkers to elaborate fraud schemes. Sarah lost her job at the diner when customers began harassing her about exploiting religious faith for money. Tommy's classmates, who had briefly united in the aftermath of his experience, started taking sides. Some, influenced by their parents' skepticism, reverted to their old patterns of exclusion. Blake Thompson, despite his earlier transformation, found himself caught between his father's corporate ambitions and his own awakened conscience. The boy who had once bullied Tommy now watched in silent distress as adults carried out a more sophisticated form of persecution. Beneath the surface, however, something else was brewing. A small group of people began meeting secretly in Mrs. Wilson's living room, Tommy's original supporters who believed in the purity of his message. Among them was Mike Stevens, a veteran investigative reporter who had covered corporate corruption cases and noticed familiar patterns in Medicorp's behavior. While the official narrative spun out of control, he quietly began gathering evidence, following paper trails and recording conversations with worried insiders. Dr. Matthews, troubled by attempts to medicalize and commercialize what he had witnessed, started documenting discrepancies between the corporate-approved story and the actual medical records. He noticed subtle alterations appearing in official documents, changes that made Tommy's recovery seem less miraculous and more attributable to Medicorp's advanced medical interventions. Tommy himself remained remarkably calm throughout the growing storm. When asked about the escalating situation, he would often smile and repeat something he claimed to have learned during his time in the light: truth doesn't need defending, it just needs witnessing. His unwavering serenity in the face of mounting pressure only served to deepen the mystery surrounding him, even as it frustrated those attempting to control his narrative. The personal toll of the controversy began to manifest in increasingly visible ways. Sarah Parker, once known for her resilient spirit, grew gaunt with worry. The loss of her diner job was just the beginning. Suddenly, no business in Millbrook would hire her. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night forced them to change their phone number repeatedly. Their small apartment, once a haven of love despite its simplicity, became a place of siege. Tommy's return to school became an exercise in endurance. The hallways of St. Catherine's, where he had once moved invisibly among his wealthy peers, now fell silent when he passed. Former friends avoided eye contact, their parents having warned them about getting involved. The school administration, under pressure from Medicorp's lawyers, removed his Reading Buddies program, citing liability concerns. His empty lunch table stood as a stark testament to social isolation. The absence of Father James left a palpable void. His replacement, Father Gregory, was a young priest more concerned with administrative efficiency than spiritual guidance. When Tommy tried to continue his afternoon study sessions in the church office, he found the door locked and a new policy posted about scheduled appointments. Only the comfortable talks about faith and philosophy that had once filled those hours were replaced with lonely walks home. Lisa Williams, one of the few students who still spoke to Tommy, paid a heavy price for her loyalty. Her family's invitation to the prestigious country club was mysteriously revoked. Her father, a partner at a local law firm, found himself excluded from important client meetings. The message was clear: association with the Parkers had consequences. Yet Lisa persisted, declaring that what she had witnessed in that classroom was more important than social status. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly neighbor who had always relied on Tommy's help with groceries, found herself caught in the crossfire. Anonymous complaints to the housing authority suddenly highlighted violations in her modest home that had been ignored for decades. When she continued hosting the secret support meetings, her son received a call suggesting his government contracts might be reviewed if his mother didn't reconsider her associations. The local homeless shelter, where Tommy had organized his coat drive, received an unexpected audit from city officials. References to his involvement were quietly removed from their website and promotional materials. Old Joe, the veteran who had received Tommy's daily sandwiches, was no longer allowed to sit in his usual spot outside the library. The systematic erasure of Tommy's good works felt like a carefully orchestrated campaign. Sarah's health began to deteriorate under the strain. The stress manifested in severe migraines and anxiety attacks that she tried to hide from Tommy. Without health insurance, she couldn't afford proper medical care. When Tommy found her crying in the bathroom late one night, clutching a bottle of expired pain medication, he felt for the first time the true weight of what his return might cost them. The final blow came when their landlord above Jerry's hardware store, under pressure from concerned citizens, declined to renew their lease. The notice arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, giving them 30 days to find new accommodation. In a town where everyone knew their story and most doors were now closed to them, the prospect of homelessness loomed like a dark cloud. Through it all, Tommy maintained an almost supernatural calm that both impressed and unnerved those around him. When asked if he regretted coming back, he would smile and say, "Light shines brightest in the darkest places." His unwavering faith, even as their world crumbled, seemed to carry an authority that no corporate campaign could replicate. Late at night, in their increasingly bare apartment, Tommy would sit with his mother and tell her more about what he had seen in the light. These quiet moments, filled with descriptions of unimaginable peace and love, became their sanctuary. Sarah noticed that plants seemed to grow better in Tommy's presence and small animals would approach him without fear. These subtle signs of grace, overlooked by those seeking grander miracles, sustained their hope. Meanwhile, in his temporary parish in Maine, Father James was compiling his detailed notes about Tommy's experience, cross-referencing them with ancient mystical texts and contemporary near-death studies. His research revealed patterns that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. Every night he prayed for guidance and strength, knowing that somewhere in Millbrook a battle was being fought between truth and power, with a child's pure faith at its center. The situation reached its breaking point on a cold Sunday morning in November, 3 months after Tommy's experience. The front page of the Millbrook Gazette carried a devastating headline, "Miracle Boy, the Truth Exposed." The article, filled with anonymous sources and carefully worded insinuations, painted a damning picture of an elaborate hoax orchestrated by the Parkers to exploit religious faith for financial gain. The story claimed that Tommy had been coached on near-death experience accounts, that his collapse had been staged, and that Sarah Parker had conspired with unidentified hospital staff to fake medical records. It suggested that Father James's transfer was linked to his discovery of the deception. Most damaging were the quoted testimonies from supposed childhood friends describing Tommy as a skilled liar who had planned the scheme for months. The impact was immediate and severe. A crowd gathered outside St. Catherine's Church before morning mass, some carrying signs condemning the blasphemy inside. Father Gregory delivered a carefully worded sermon about the dangers of false prophets. Tommy and Sarah, sitting in their usual pew, endured harsh stares and whispered condemnations. Several families ostentatiously moved to different seats, leaving an empty circle around them in the once crowded church. Richard Thompson called an emergency school board meeting that afternoon. In a swift and unanimous decision, Tommy's scholarship was revoked. The official reason cited violation of moral conduct codes, but everyone understood the real message. As they left the building, Sarah overheard 2 board members discussing Medicorp's plans for a new private wing at St. Catherine's, a project that had apparently been contingent on resolving the Parker situation. The media frenzy that followed was brutal. Television crews camped outside their apartment, their aggressive questioning making Tommy's daily walk to school feel like running a gauntlet. Social media exploded with theories and accusations, each more outrageous than the last. Local businesses displayed signs reading "No interviews about the Parker fraud," a clear message that the family was no longer welcome. Even those who had witnessed Tommy's collapse began to doubt their memories. Sister Margaret, under pressure from the school administration, released a statement suggesting that the excitement of the moment might have led to misinterpretation of events. Dr. Matthews found his medical credentials questioned when he tried to defend the authenticity of the case. The hospital board, heavily influenced by Medicorp, issued a press release distancing themselves from his statements. The most painful betrayal came from Blake Thompson. In a televised interview arranged by his father, the boy who had witnessed Tommy's collapse now suggested that it had been part of an elaborate performance. His rehearsed statement, delivered with visible discomfort, described how Tommy had allegedly bragged about planning the whole thing. The fact that Blake couldn't meet the camera's eye as he spoke seemed lost on viewers eager to embrace the scandal. Lisa Williams and her family faced their own crisis. Anonymous tips to her father's law firm clients suggested financial improprieties, all traceable to his daughter's continued defense of Tommy. When Lisa tried to share a video of Tommy's collapse that she had recorded on her phone, she found the device mysteriously wiped clean. Her social media accounts were suspended for suspicious activity when she attempted to speak out. Tommy's reaction to the public humiliation was unexpected. Rather than defending himself or expressing anger, he showed a compassion that unnerved his accusers. When reporters shouted questions about the alleged hoax, he responded with gentle concern for their well-being. To those who condemned him, he offered prayers and understanding. This unwavering grace in the face of persecution only served to fuel more speculation about his true nature. Mrs. Wilson, watching from her window as another news crew harassed the Parkers, placed a call to an old friend, Mike Stevens, the investigative reporter. "There's something very wrong happening in our town," she told him, her voice shaking with emotion. "And it's not what they're saying about Tommy." That conversation would set in motion a chain of events that would shake Millbrook to its foundations. Mike Stevens had built his career exposing corporate corruption, but something about the Parker case struck a deeper chord. Working from a makeshift office in Mrs. Wilson's basement, he began piecing together a complex web of money, power, and manipulation. Bank records showed suspicious transfers between Medicorp subsidiaries and key players in the campaign against the Parkers. Anonymous sources within the corporation began reaching out, sharing documents that painted a disturbing picture. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Blake Thompson's mother, Elizabeth. Unable to bear the weight of her conscience, she contacted Stevens with evidence that her husband had orchestrated the entire smear campaign. She provided emails detailing Medicorp's plans to acquire St. Catherine's property for a luxury medical complex, plans that had been in motion long before Tommy's experience. The boy's miracle and his message of universal love had threatened their carefully constructed scheme. Dr. Matthews, risking his medical career, supplied unaltered copies of Tommy's original medical records. The documentation proved conclusively that the boy had been clinically dead for 15 minutes, far longer than any known case of successful resuscitation. More importantly, hidden security footage from the hospital showed mysterious equipment failures and inexplicable light phenomena during Tommy's revival that had been deliberately suppressed. Lisa Williams, despite her family's fears, came forward with recovered data from her phone. Tech experts verified that the video of Tommy's collapse had been remotely wiped through sophisticated corporate spyware. The recovered footage clearly showed the genuine nature of the incident, including the inexplicable golden light that multiple witnesses had described. Meanwhile, Father James had not been idle in his Maine exile. He had compiled extensive research linking Tommy's testimony with ancient mystical accounts found in sealed Vatican archives, accounts that had been suppressed for centuries because they challenged institutional power structures. His detailed analysis, smuggled back to Millbrook through a network of sympathetic priests, provided theological validation for Tommy's experience. The turning point came when a junior executive at Medicorp, troubled by his role in the conspiracy, provided Stevens with internal memos outlining Project Miracle, a cynical plan to either co-opt or discredit Tommy's message for corporate profit. The documents revealed how Medicorp had infiltrated local institutions, manipulated media coverage, and systematically worked to destroy the credibility of anyone who supported the Parkers. Sister Margaret, freed from pressure by the mounting evidence, recanted her earlier statement. In tears, she described how school administrators had threatened to reveal past indiscretions if she didn't cooperate. Her detailed account of Tommy's collapse and the inexplicable events that followed matched perfectly with the recovered video footage. As Stevens prepared to publish his findings, Medicorp launched a desperate final attack. Sarah Parker was arrested on trumped-up fraud charges, and Tommy was temporarily placed in state custody. The corporation's lawyers moved to block the story with legal threats, while their PR team flooded social media with distracting controversies. But they had underestimated the power of Tommy's unwavering grace. During his brief time in state care, he touched the hearts of social workers and fellow foster children alike. Stories began emerging about mysterious healings and inexplicable phenomena surrounding him. Even the most hardened officials found themselves moved by his continuing message of love and forgiveness. The dam finally broke when Blake Thompson, unable to live with his forced betrayal, ran away from home. He was found hours later at the homeless shelter Tommy had once served, writing out a detailed confession. His father's desperate attempts to silence him only served to confirm the truth of his account. The young boy's courage in standing up to his father became a symbol of the triumph of truth over power. As we approach the dramatic revelation of this touching story about faith, truth, and divine love, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful stories that remind us of the extraordinary miracles that can happen in ordinary lives. Join our growing community of believers. The night before Mike Stevens' expose was set to publish, Sarah Parker collapsed in their temporary shelter at Mrs. Wilson's home. The months of stress, harassment, and uncertainty had finally taken their physical toll. Tommy found her unconscious in the bathroom, her breathing shallow, her skin cold to the touch. The same paramedics who had responded to his own crisis months earlier now rushed his mother to St. Michael's Hospital. The diagnosis was devastating: a stress-induced brain aneurysm, requiring immediate surgery. Without insurance and blacklisted by Medicorp's network, Sarah's options were severely limited. The hospital administration, under corporate pressure, insisted on payment arrangements before proceeding with the necessary operation. Dr. Matthews fought furiously with his superiors, arguing that their actions violated the Hippocratic Oath. Tommy sat by his mother's bedside, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The machines tracking her vital signs beeped ominously in the background. "I'm not ready to see the light again, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time since his return. "Not without you," the nurses who overheard him wept quietly at their station, torn between their professional obligations and their personal convictions. In Maine, Father James received news of Sarah's condition. As he prepared to drive back to Millbrook, defying his reassignment orders, he suffered a severe heart attack. The elderly priest's last conscious act was to scribble a message that would later prove crucial. The light shows the truth. Look for the children. He was rushed to a local hospital, his collection of research notes left scattered across his small rectory. The impact on Tommy was profound. For the first time, his serene demeanor cracked. Those who saw him in the hospital corridor reported that he seemed to be engaged in an intense internal struggle. The previously unwavering faith in his eyes now reflected a deep questioning. "Why does love have to hurt so much?" he asked Mrs. Wilson, who had hardly left his side throughout the ordeal. The community's reaction to this double tragedy revealed the deep divisions that had formed. Some saw it as divine punishment for perceived deception, while others recognized it as the result of systematic persecution. The local newspaper, still under Medicorp's influence, ran a small article suggesting that Sarah's condition was possibly self-inflicted for sympathy. Blake Thompson, already struggling with guilt over his forced testimony, became physically ill when he learned about Sarah's condition. His own mother, Elizabeth, found him feverish and distressed, repeatedly mumbling about letting them hurt angels. The boy's crisis of conscience would soon force his parents to confront their own roles in the unfolding tragedy. Lisa Williams and her family, now facing bankruptcy due to their continued support of the Parkers, gathered their last resources to help with Sarah's medical bills. Their act of sacrifice inspired others to secretly contribute, though the amounts fell far short of what was needed. The hospital's billing department, under strict corporate oversight, remained unmoved by these grassroots efforts. Tommy spent his 11th birthday in the hospital corridor, praying not for presents or celebration, but simply for his mother to survive the night. The sight of the small boy who had once spoken so eloquently of divine love and forgiveness, now sitting alone in silent vigil, became a powerful symbol of innocence confronting institutional cruelty. Dr. Matthews, making his rounds, paused to sit with Tommy. "I've seen a lot of miracles in my career," he said softly, "but none as powerful as your love for your mom." The veteran doctor's eyes filled with tears as he added, "Sometimes the greatest test of faith is continuing to love when it seems like love itself is being punished." The impact of Sarah's condition and Father James's heart attack rippled through the community like a shockwave. St. Catherine's Church, once a vibrant center of faith, felt hollow during services. Father Gregory's sermons about institutional loyalty fell on increasingly deaf ears as parishioners grappled with their collective role in the unfolding tragedy. The empty pews where the Parkers once sat stood as a silent accusation. Richard Thompson maintained a public facade of corporate confidence, but signs of strain began showing. His wife Elizabeth reported hearing him pace the halls at night, muttering about necessary sacrifices and greater good. Their son Blake's deteriorating mental state forced them to send him to a private psychiatric facility, where he continued to insist that he had helped hurt an angel. The hospital staff witnessed an inexplicable phenomenon. Despite Sarah's critical condition, plants in her room bloomed out of season, and her vital signs strengthened whenever Tommy was present. Dr. Matthews documented these occurrences meticulously, even as hospital administrators demanded he stop investigating coincidences. Several nurses requested transfers to Sarah's floor, reporting a sense of peace and healing in her room that defied medical explanation. News from Maine about Father James's condition grew worse. The elderly priest lingered in a coma, his research notes now scattered across different sympathetic parishes for safekeeping. His cryptic final message about the children in the light became a subject of intense speculation among those who believed in Tommy's experience. Young parish members began holding candlelight vigils outside both hospitals, singing hymns of healing and hope. Mrs. Wilson, exhausted from her role as Tommy's temporary guardian, suffered a minor stroke but refused to leave her post. From her own hospital bed, she continued coordinating the underground network of supporters, her determination inspiring others to persist despite growing corporate pressure. Her small apartment became a hidden command center for those still fighting to protect Tommy and preserve the truth. The local homeless community, remembering Tommy's past kindness, staged their own form of protest. Led by Old Joe, they began appearing silently outside Medicorp's offices, holding signs that simply read, "What would Tommy do?" Their peaceful presence proved impossible to disperse without causing a public relations nightmare for the corporation. Lisa Williams, facing her own family's financial ruin, discovered an unexpected inner strength. She organized a student prayer group that met secretly during lunch breaks, their numbers growing despite official discouragement. The school administration's attempts to shut down these gatherings only served to strengthen the students' resolve. Mike Stevens, racing to complete his investigation before publishing the expose, received an anonymous death threat. Rather than intimidating him, the threat convinced him that he was close to uncovering something even bigger than he had initially suspected. He began sleeping in different locations each night, his notes distributed among trusted allies for safekeeping. Through it all, Tommy maintained his vigil at his mother's bedside. His presence in the hospital corridors became almost mythical. Staff members reported that equipment worked better when he passed by, and patients in nearby rooms experienced unexplained improvements. Yet the boy himself seemed to be carrying an impossible weight, his once bright eyes now shadowed with a depth of suffering that no child should have to bear. As Sarah's condition remained critical and Father James unresponsive, a subtle change came over Tommy. Those closest to him noticed that he began speaking less of his experience in the light and more about the darkness that people carry within them. Yet even in these moments of deep personal crisis, his capacity for forgiveness remained extraordinary. When a junior Medicorp executive racked with guilt came to apologize, Tommy hugged him and said simply, "The light loves you too." The truth broke like a thunderstorm over Millbrook on a cold December morning. Mike Stevens' expose, simultaneously published in 3 major newspapers and supported by an extensive online documentation database, laid bare the full scope of Medicorp's conspiracy. The investigation revealed a corporate plot so elaborate and callous that it shocked even the most hardened skeptics. Security footage from multiple angles of Tommy's classroom collapse emerged, clearly showing the inexplicable golden light that witnesses had described. Technical experts confirmed the video's authenticity, noting that the light phenomena defied all known explanations. More damaging were the internal Medicorp emails discussing how to contain and control what their own experts had confirmed was a genuine miraculous event. The documentation proved that Medicorp had planned to acquire and demolish St. Catherine's Church and School long before Tommy's experience. The property was crucial for their planned luxury medical complex, but the church's historical status had protected it. Richard Thompson's role as both hospital CEO and school board member was revealed to be part of a long-term strategy to undermine the institution from within. Financial records exposed a complex web of payoffs and threats. Local media outlets had received substantial advertising contracts in exchange for running manufactured stories discrediting the Parkers. Business owners who had shunned the family were shown to have received mysterious loans and preferential treatment from Medicorp-affiliated banks. Even the police department had accepted corporate donations to look the other way during harassment incidents. The most shocking revelations came from Elizabeth Thompson herself. In a sworn affidavit, she detailed how her husband and Medicorp executives had carefully orchestrated every aspect of the campaign against Tommy. They had hired professional actors to pose as concerned parents, created fake social media accounts to spread disinformation, and even manipulated hospital records to cast doubt on the medical aspects of Tommy's experience. Dr. Matthews' complete medical records, released with Sarah Parker's permission, provided irrefutable evidence of Tommy's clinical death and inexplicable revival. Independent medical experts confirmed that his case defied all known scientific parameters for resuscitation. The hospital's own security systems had recorded unexplainable equipment behavior and energy readings during the event. Former Medicorp employees began coming forward with their own testimonies. A junior executive revealed recordings of meetings where corporate leaders discussed the threat posed by Tommy's message of universal love and equality. If people start believing that stuff about love being more important than money, one executive was heard saying, the whole system falls apart. The investigation uncovered Medicorp's involvement in Father James's transfer and subsequent heart attack. Documents showed they had pressured church authorities by threatening to withdraw funding from Catholic hospitals nationwide. More disturbingly, evidence suggested that the priest's medical emergency may have been induced by stress tactics deliberately employed to silence him. Blake Thompson's psychiatric records, leaked by a concerned healthcare worker, documented the psychological trauma inflicted on the young boy by his father's demands to falsely testify against his friend. His breakdown was revealed to be a direct result of corporate pressure tactics used against a child, leading to immediate investigations by child welfare authorities. Lisa Williams' recovered phone data proved crucial. The sophisticated spyware used to delete her video evidence was traced back to a cybersecurity firm on Medicorp's payroll. The firm's internal communications revealed a systematic campaign to suppress all digital evidence of Tommy's miracle, including the harassment of anyone who tried to share related content online. Old Joe, the homeless veteran who had received Tommy's daily sandwiches, emerged as an unexpected key witness. His military intelligence background had led him to document suspicious activities around the Parkers, accumulating a damning collection of photographs and notes that corroborated the investigation's findings. Mrs. Wilson's stroke was linked to stress induced by corporate surveillance and intimidation. Private security firms hired by Medicorp had subjected her to round-the-clock monitoring, electromagnetic interference, and psychological warfare techniques typically reserved for counterterrorism operations. The public response to these revelations was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters gathered outside Medicorp's headquarters, their signs echoing Tommy's message about love over profit. National news crews descended on Millbrook, but this time they came seeking truth rather than sensation. Social media exploded with Justice for Tommy hashtags, sharing recovered videos of his miracle and testimonies from those who had witnessed it. Richard Thompson's arrest was captured live on television. The sight of the once powerful CEO being led away in handcuffs became a symbol of corporate accountability. His wife Elizabeth, granted immunity for her cooperation, provided prosecutors with additional evidence that implicated corporate executives across multiple states. The investigation expanded to reveal similar schemes targeting other communities and religious institutions. Within hours of the expose's publication, Sarah Parker's medical care situation transformed. Multiple prestigious hospitals offered to provide her treatment free of charge. A team of renowned neurosurgeons volunteered their services, and medical transport companies competed to safely transfer her to a state-of-the-art facility. The same corporations that had once shunned the Parkers now scrambled to demonstrate their humanity. Bishop Harrison was forced to step down after documents exposed his acceptance of substantial bribes to influence church policy. The Vatican launched an immediate investigation with particular interest in Father James's research linking Tommy's experience to suppressed historical accounts of divine intervention. The elderly priest, still unconscious in Maine, had succeeded in protecting centuries of hidden truth. At St. Catherine's, a remarkable transformation occurred. Father Gregory resigned in shame and the school board was dissolved. Parents who had once shunned Tommy now arrived at the hospital with tearful apologies and offers of support. The Reading Buddies program was reinstated, with a waiting list of students eager to participate in what was now seen as a legacy of compassion. Blake Thompson, hearing of the revelations from his psychiatric facility, finally found peace. His doctor reported a dramatic improvement once the burden of deception was lifted. His recorded sessions, describing the spiritual weight of betraying Tommy, became powerful testimony about the cost of choosing corporate interests over truth and friendship. The business community of Millbrook faced its own reckoning. Store owners who had posted signs against the Parkers now displayed messages of apology and support. The diner that had fired Sarah offered her lifetime employment and part ownership. Local banks, exposed for their role in the conspiracy, established scholarship funds in Tommy's name. Mrs. Wilson, recovering from her stroke, received an outpouring of community support. Her apartment, once a secret haven for truth seekers, became a celebrated gathering place for healing and reconciliation. The plants in her window boxes bloomed out of season, a phenomenon that locals attributed to the lingering effect of Tommy's presence. Lisa Williams and her family's fortunes reversed dramatically. Her father's law firm, vindicated by their principled stand, received a flood of new clients attracted by their demonstrated integrity. Lisa's recovered video evidence made her a minor celebrity, but she used her platform only to redirect attention to Tommy's message of universal love. Old Joe found himself suddenly respected rather than ignored. His military background and role in documenting the conspiracy earned him recognition from veterans organizations. The library where he had received Tommy's daily sandwiches established a permanent seat in his name, along with a community outreach program for homeless veterans. Through it all, Tommy remained by his mother's bedside, his gentle presence a reminder of what the struggle had been about. When asked about the revelations, he responded with characteristic wisdom, "The light doesn't just show us what's wrong, it shows us how to make things right." His words, once dismissed as childish fantasy, were now being quoted in corporate boardrooms and religious seminars across the country. Spring arrived early in Millbrook that year, bringing with it a series of miracles that transformed the town and its people. Sarah Parker's recovery defied all medical expectations. The day after her successful surgery, doctors were stunned to find her neural scans showing unprecedented healing patterns. Within weeks, she was not only conscious but stronger than she had been in years. The medical team documented her case extensively, noting the inexplicable golden glow that seemed to emanate from her room during Tommy's visits. Father James awakened from his coma on Easter morning, his first words being the completion of his interrupted message, "The light shows the truth. Look for the children, for they still see with unclouded hearts." His recovery coincided with the Vatican's official acknowledgement of Tommy's experience as a genuine miracle, based on both medical evidence and newly uncovered historical records of similar divine interventions. St. Catherine's underwent a profound transformation. The school reopened under new leadership, with Tommy's Kindness campaign becoming a core part of its curriculum. The bulletin board that had once tracked simple acts of kindness now occupied an entire wall, filled with stories of lives changed through compassion. Students who had once competed for academic rankings now collaborated to support struggling classmates, inspired by Tommy's example. Blake Thompson returned to school a changed person. His public reconciliation with Tommy became a powerful symbol of healing for the community. The two boys established a peer counseling program, helping other children navigate the challenges of standing up for truth in a world often dominated by adult compromises. Their friendship, tested by corporate greed and restored by honest confession, inspired similar reconciliations throughout the town. The former Medicorp property, seized in legal proceedings, was transformed into the Parker Center for Community Healing. The facility combined cutting-edge medical care with spiritual wellness programs, operating on a sliding scale that ensured no one would ever be turned away for lack of funds. Sarah Parker, fully recovered, became its first administrator, implementing policies that prioritized compassion over profit. Mrs. Wilson's apartment building was declared a historical site, recognized for its role in protecting truth and fostering community resistance to corporate corruption. The small living room where supporters had gathered in secret became a meeting space for various community outreach programs. The garden beneath her windows, where Tommy had often helped her tend flowers, bloomed with unusual vibrancy, attracting visitors from across the country who sought its peaceful atmosphere. Lisa Williams established a youth journalism program, teaching students the importance of truth-telling and ethical reporting. Her recovered video of Tommy's miracle, now preserved in both the Vatican archives and the Smithsonian, became a teaching tool for discussions about faith, science, and moral courage. The program's motto, borrowed from Tommy's experience, reminded students that truth doesn't need defending, it needs witnessing. Old Joe found a permanent home in the renovated caretaker's cottage behind St. Catherine's, where he continued to receive daily visits from Tommy and other students. His military experience and street wisdom became valuable assets in teaching children about perseverance and dignity in the face of adversity. The sandwich tradition that Tommy had started evolved into a full-scale community kitchen, serving meals with the same love that had once accompanied those simple lunch bag offerings. The lasting impact of Tommy's experience reached far beyond Millbrook's borders. His story, now thoroughly documented and validated, sparked a national conversation about the intersection of faith, corporate responsibility, and community values. Major companies began reevaluating their approaches to community engagement, with several establishing Parker principles that prioritize social responsibility over profit maximization. Tommy's public appearances remained rare and purposeful. Rather than pursuing the fame that Medicorp had once tried to manufacture, he focused on quiet acts of service. Yet his presence at hospitals, schools, and community centers invariably left a trail of unexplained phenomena, spontaneous healings, reconciliations between estranged families, and moments of profound spiritual awakening. Scientists studying these events noted consistent patterns of elevated energy readings and inexplicable light phenomena. On the first anniversary of his near-death experience, Tommy finally shared the complete message he had received in the light. Speaking to a gathered crowd that included both the town's wealthy elite and its homeless residents, he described a vision of human potential that transcended religious and social boundaries. "The light showed me that we're all connected by threads of love. Every act of kindness strengthens these threads, while every act of cruelty frays them. But even the most damaged threads can be repaired by love." The Parker Foundation, established with funds from the legal settlement, focused on supporting initiatives that embodied this message. Rather than building monuments or institutions, it invested in people and relationships. The Foundation's signature program, Lightbearers, provided resources for individuals and communities working to heal divisions and restore broken relationships. Sarah Parker and Father James collaborated on a book that combined their perspectives on Tommy's miracle. Unlike previous accounts of near-death experiences, their work focused not on the sensational aspects but on the practical applications of divine love in everyday life. The book became a blueprint for community transformation, translated into dozens of languages and studied in both religious and secular contexts. Blake Thompson, inspired by his own journey from persecutor to ally, developed a youth program helping children resist peer pressure and corporate manipulation. His father, serving his prison sentence, began corresponding with ethics professors and corporate leaders about the human cost of prioritizing profit over people. These letters, later published, provided powerful insights into the psychology of corporate corruption and the possibility of redemption. The medical community's understanding of life, death, and healing expanded through ongoing research into Tommy's case. Dr. Matthews led a team studying the physiological effects of compassion and forgiveness, documenting measurable changes in patients who embraced Tommy's message of universal love. Their findings suggested that spiritual and emotional healing could trigger measurable physical transformations. As Tommy entered his teenage years, he remained remarkably grounded. When asked about his role in these changes, he consistently redirected attention to others' capacity for love and transformation. The real miracle, he would say, isn't what happened to me in the light. It's what happens when people remember who they really are, beings made of love, temporarily confused by fear. The final testimonial to Tommy's impact came from an unexpected source. On his deathbed, Richard Thompson requested a meeting with the boy he had once tried to destroy. Their conversation, though private, led to Thompson's establishment of an ethics center dedicated to studying corporate responsibility and human values. His last written statement acknowledged that his greatest business failure had revealed his most important spiritual truth. In trying to control the light, I finally learned to see it. If you've been touched by Tommy's extraordinary journey of faith, love, and redemption, please support our team by subscribing to this channel. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these powerful stories that remind us of life's true miracles. Share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder of love's transformative power. Don't forget to like and comment below with your thoughts and feelings about Tommy's story. Would you like to hear what happens next in Tommy's remarkable journey? Let us know in the comments section. Together we can spread this message of hope and healing.